All right, well, I can't say that I've followed what Milo has said and written very closely. I've watched a few interviews with him, and I know about his lifetime ban from Twitter. Obviously, I agree with him about a few things, and I disagree with him about others. The points of disagreement are probably unsurprising. He's a huge Trump supporter. He's religious and given to defending a belief in God in terms that are no more impressive than ones you've heard 1,000 times before. And I find in someone who is obviously smart and very articulate, these arguments are even more annoying. So our minds don't quite meet there. My basic gripe with Milo, and again, this is based only on a few interviews and a couple of his articles, is that he strikes me as fairly insincere. I mean, he appears to be trolling all of humanity at this point and having a lot of fun doing it. And half of what he says about social justice warriors and political correctness and Islamophobia is very incisive and amusing. But he seems to approach everything as a performance, and this leaves me wondering what he actually believes. So I don't see him as a natural ally for what I'm doing. But I do think he's gotten screwed by the media. I mean, his ban from Twitter is ridiculous, given that Twitter doesn't ban jihadists with any reliability. There's definitely a liberal media bias that is cutting against people like Milo, which he and his fans are appropriately outraged about. And as for the alt-right, for which Milo is the poster boy, I'm not sure I can say anything about it that is fair or useful. It seems to contain some smart people who are outraged by outrageous things, as Milo seems to be, at least some of the time. And it contains real racist nitwits and everything in between. It's a bit like the Black Lives Matter movement in that respect, which is to say a totally mixed bag, and the net result of which is divisive, in my view. As far as I can tell, becoming a part of a movement doesn't help anybody think clearly. So I distrust identity politics of all kinds. I think we should talk about specific issues, whether it's trade or guns or immigration or foreign interventions or abortion or anything else. And we should reason honestly about them. And I'm not the first person to notice that it's pretty strange that knowing a person's position on any one of these issues generally allows you to predict his position on the others. This shouldn't happen. Some of these issues are totally unrelated. Why should a person's attitude toward guns be predictive of his views on climate change or immigration or abortion? And yet, it almost certainly is in our society. That's a sign that people are joining tribes and movements, right? It's not the sign of clear thinking. If you're reasoning honestly about facts, then the color of your skin is irrelevant. The religion of your parents is irrelevant. Whether you're gay or straight is irrelevant. Your identity is irrelevant. In fact, if you're talking about reality, its character can't be predicated on who you happen to be. Right? That's what it means to be talking about reality. And this also applies to the reality of human experience and human suffering. For instance, if vaccines don't cause autism, if that is just a fact, and that's what the best science suggests at this point, well, then when arguing against this view, you need data or a new analysis of existing data. You need an argument. Okay? And the nature of any argument is that its validity doesn't depend on who you are. That's why a good argument should be accepted by others, right? No matter who they are. So in the case of vaccines causing autism, you don't get to say, as a parent of a child with autism, I believe X, Y, and Z. Whatever is true about the biological basis of autism can't depend on who you are. And who you are in this case is probably adding a level of emotional engagement with the issue, which would be totally understandable, but would also be unlikely to lead you to think about it more clearly. The facts are whatever they are. And it's not an accident that being disinterested, not uninterested, but disinterested, that is not being emotionally engaged, usually improves a person's ability to reason about the facts. When talking about violence in our society, again, the facts are whatever they are. How many people got shot? How many died? What was the color of their skin? Who shot them? What was the color of their skin? Getting a handle on these facts doesn't require one to say, as a black man, I know X, Y, and Z. The color of your skin simply isn't relevant information. When talking about the data, that is what is happening throughout a whole society, your life experience isn't relevant information. And the fact that you think it might be is a problem. And as you'll hear in a minute, it's a problem I recently ran into on another podcast. Now, this isn't to say that a person's life experience is never relevant to a conversation. Of course it is. And it can be used to establish certain kinds of facts. I mean, if someone says to you, Catholics don't believe in hell, it's perfectly valid to retort, actually, my mom is a Catholic, and she believes in hell. Of course, there's a larger question of what the Catholic doctrine actually is. But if a person is making a statement about a certain group of people, and you are a member of the group, you might very well be in a position to falsify his claim on the basis of your experience. But a person's identity and life experience often aren't relevant when talking about facts, and they're usually invoked in ways that are clearly fallacious. And many people seem to be making a political religion out of ignoring this difference. So I urge you not to be one of those people, whether you're on the left or on the right. Now, there were several other questions here asking me to describe my political beliefs. Now, it's hard to do in a way that won't give people false assumptions. I'm definitely left of center on most issues. I think we want a social safety net below which we don't want anyone to fall. But I think we should use government and its legal machinery rather sparingly. The problem with having too many laws is that to enforce them, you need to back them up with the threat of violence. If you're going to criminalize drug use, for instance, you have decided that you're willing to send people to kick in your neighbor's door with guns drawn and haul him off to jail for doing something as innocuous as smoking pot. Not only is this unethical, it's dangerous for everyone involved. And it's a patently insane use of resources. So I'm basically a libertarian in feeling that peaceful, honest people have the right to be left alone. And I do think government should get out of our lives when what it is doing is harmful or wasteful. But I think it should do those things that markets can't do efficiently or won't do at all. So I'm not a doctrinaire libertarian in any sense. You clearly can't privatize everything. And all the anarchists running around attacking people for, quote, worshiping the religion of the state should probably spend a little time in countries where the state is weak and people take the law into their own hands. The results are never pretty, right? I mean, we need a strong state to keep order. We need the police and the military. We need a state that has a true monopoly on the use of violence so that people don't feel the need to be violent themselves to protect their interests. But the power of the state really needs to be reserved for things that safeguard human well-being, and it needs to do it in ways that make sense. There was a related question here about Chomsky. Chomsky says new atheism is state worship in disguise. You don't subscribe to state communism or fascism, but at the same time, I don't see anything in your writings against the concept of the state. Do you believe states are necessary evils? Would that count as state worship? I'm sympathetic with having as little government as is compatible with human well-being. But human well-being is the point, right? And in some ways, we want the state to be more efficient and powerful than it is. So ask yourself, if you ever needed the cops, you really needed them, because your life or the life of someone you love depended on it, how long would you want to wait for them to show up? Would you want them there in 2 seconds? Well, that's Minority Report, right? How strong a state would you need to manage that? No doubt there would be unintended consequences of having that kind of response time. So it's always a balancing act between things like security and freedom and privacy. But I'm pretty confident that the world isn't ready for a stateless utopia that's like Burning Man for 7 billion people. Okay, maybe in 100 years, or maybe in 1,000. But it seems to me that people aren't good enough yet. They're not ethical enough. And one reason they aren't is identity politics, which is just tribalism by another name. So my politics are hard to summarize because my goal is to understand what is actually going on in the world. And I'd like to see us use that understanding to improve human life. And unfortunately, there's no political party or platform that reliably tracks that concern. So rather than talk about parties and platforms, I tend to talk about specific issues. Now, as many of you know, I've come out very strongly against Trump and very tepidly for Clinton. And there were many questions about why I haven't considered a third-party candidate. Well, the reason is that to vote for anyone other than Clinton increases the likelihood that we'll have President Trump. And I really think that would be potentially catastrophic. Now, many people have criticized me for my rejection of Trump and my support for Clinton. And unfortunately, this criticism never makes much sense. I've been very clear in describing Clinton as the lesser of two evils. There is a ton to say about why she's not a great candidate. Okay, I totally understand why some people don't like her and don't trust her. But even with all her problems, she will probably be a competent president. In fact, I think she stands a chance of being a good president because she is actually smart and well-informed and reasonably concerned about not destroying the world. And that's true even with all the stupid lies and mistakes she's trailing behind her. I mean, yes, there is something fairly rapacious and opportunistic about both Clintons, but their vices are mostly aligned with reasonable policies. There are exceptions, but I think this is generally true. Okay? And again, most crucially, they are not idiots or ignoramuses. Now, I won't go on and on about Trump here for a full hour, because I already did that in podcast number 38, the second of the End of Faith sessions, to the horror of at least 20% of you. But I'll just say that those of you who are mystified that I could forgive Clinton her obvious lying and other indiscretions just don't understand what a dangerous imbecile I think Trump is. I really think he is a child in a man's body. He is a malignantly selfish, ignorant, and petty person, and a tyrant in the making, insofar as our system could accommodate a tyrant. As I said on that other podcast, if you're supporting the guy because he'll, quote, shake things up, I think you're just playing a game of chicken with human history, and there's no one in the other car. It is absolutely astonishing to me that this guy is a candidate for the presidency. Now, obviously, those of you who support Trump must think that I've been misled about him. But I don't think that's true. I believe that I see through the media spin against him. I see that he's been occasionally treated unfairly. He's also been treated far too fairly and graded on a curve for almost everything of substance. I mean, you saw Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate, get destroyed in the press for not knowing what Aleppo was. Trump commits gaffes like that all the time, and people just move on. And his gaffes are much worse. His gaffes are policy prescriptions that he pretends to have thought through and that would be disastrous if implemented. Like at the presidential forum the other day with Matt Lauer, where he was asked about the war in Iraq. I'm going to actually read some of this. He was asked about the war in Iraq. And he said, I've always said we should have just taken their oil. When asked how he would do this, he said, and this is a quote, well, you just would leave a certain group behind, and you would take various sections where they have the oil. People don't know this about Iraq, but they have among the largest oil reserves in the world. You know, it used to be to the victor go the spoils. Now, there was no victor here. Believe me, there was no victor. But I always said, take the oil. One of the benefits we would have had if we took the oil is ISIS would not have been able to take the oil and use the oil to fuel themselves. End quote. Now, it should be clear that this is much worse than just blanking on what Aleppo is. Okay? This is just insanity. Forget about the logistical problems of, quote, just taking the oil. Forget about the ethical problem of taking the main resource from a country we were ostensibly trying to help and further impoverishing tens of millions of people who we had just subjected to punishing sanctions for a decade and who we just freed from a brutal dictatorship. I mean, what's he picturing happening in Iraq to the Iraqi people when we just take their oil? Mass starvation? Okay, forget about that. Forget about the fact that ISIS's primary funding hasn't been oil. They were robbing banks and forcing people to just give them money. Forget about that. Just imagine how the world, both Muslim and non, would have responded to our invading Iraq and then just stealing their oil, which is to say, confirming the craziest conspiracy theories about why we invaded the country in the first place. Trump is telling us that this is what he would have done had he inherited the ongoing problem of Iraq. This is so much worse than not understanding what the word Aleppo means in the context of a weirdly posed question. And yet Trump gets away with it. And again, there have been probably hundreds of moments like this in the campaign. In any case, I've bracketed all the charges against him that seem spurious. And I've acknowledged that his plain talk about radical Islam is preferable to the sanctimonious lies we get out of the Democrats. And if you want to read what I think Hillary could and should say about Islam and the war on terror, that article's on my blog. But I can't overlook the fact that the man shows every sign, really every sign, of being motivated by pure selfishness and narcissism, to be compared with Hillary's partial selfishness and narcissism. And he strikes me as completely rudderless intellectually. You want to understand how I see Trump? Blow up a balloon without tying off the end and hold it up high and then release it. And then watch it fly chaotically around the room. That's Trump's mind. In my view, that's what we'd be doing with the country if we put him in charge. Just hitching our future to a totally chaotic system. If that's your view of shaking things up, you're a nihilist. My criticism of Trump, in particular about the way he speaks, and what that says about the way he thinks, which I went on and on about in podcast 38, that criticism isn't political. It's psychological. It's neurological. The guy seems to be bullshitting to a degree that borders on confabulation. I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't have any clinical experience. I'm not making a diagnosis. But I am making a judgment about him as a person. It seems to me that there is something wrong with his mind. This isn't political. I have no loyalty to the Democratic Party. And I would never say that about someone like Mitt Romney. Now, Romney is a religious bumpkin who wears magic underpants, but he seems perfectly normal to me psychologically. Here's the difference between Clinton and Trump, in my view. When I hear Clinton speak extemporaneously, I hear someone who is well-informed, who is trying to be coherent, but who is also fairly paranoid about saying something unpopular and making a political mistake. So she's cautious to a fault, egregiously so. But I can live with that because I know she can find Pakistan on a map, and I know she knows a lot about what's going on there. When I hear Trump speak extemporaneously, I hear someone very often getting prompted by his own misstatements to complete a thought in a way that he clearly didn't intend to, which is to say that the thing he's now saying doesn't reflect anything he believed or even thought about before. But he's saying it now because the last phrase he spoke just launched him there. Right? It's as though he's speaking in verse, and he's forced again and again to complete the rhyme. It's like he says, there was once a man from Nantucket, and he's got to finish the thought. Right? So he says, who always carried a bucket. But he didn't know he was going to say bucket. And now he's stuck with it. And now he'll go to the mat defending bucket. But he's rhyming about policy and about world leaders like Putin. And it's the rhyme of ignorance and error and bombast. Just listen to the man speak. It's unbelievable. It's like listening to the contestants at the Miss America pageant, maybe this isn't an accident. He owned the Miss America pageant. This is almost surely unfair to many of these women. I don't actually watch the Miss America pageant, but there have been a few viral videos that have come out of there when some of these women have been asked things like, how will you spread world peace, right? And it's just this agonizing tightrope walk. And again, the magical thing about Trump is that he has said so many strange and incoherent and dangerously crazy things that people are inured to it. Almost no one ever comments on how shockingly empty of content, which is to say empty of thought, his speech is. Imagine how you'd feel about me if I spoke like him. Let's say I was having a debate about Islam, and when challenged about my views, imagine if I said something like this, right? I obviously can't do his voice, but this is his pattern of speech. How do I know about Islam? Well, it's a religion. It's a big religion. Billions of people. I don't know how many billions, but there are billions. Many, many people. Some good, some not so good. I've been to many mosques. They're beautiful buildings. So there's beauty there, and I understand that. I haven't denied it. But what I also know is a lot of violent people. I mean, they're telling us they hate us. They're saying it. I've heard them say it. We all have. They scream it from the mosques. They scream it. So what can you do? They scream it. You might think that's a caricature, but there are many examples of Trump speaking like that on issues of civilizational importance. This is a mind with no apparent purchase on the world. When he speaks, he's just creating an atmosphere, and it's the atmosphere of false confidence. The prospect that this man could be president is just terrifying. But then I get questions